Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you again, Yair, for inviting me back for the fourth or fifth time to speak at Muna. It's funny, I'm only here for, it's like my year. I've been here a year ago. It was the Shana Rishona. Anyways, I just want to make two announcements. Tomorrow, Wednesday night, there will be a Tu B'Shvat Seder at the Kollel. So we're inviting everyone here. If you know anyone that wants to come, we're happy to come together and enjoy a festival Seder at the Kollel. Wednesday night at 7:30. We have tons of fruit. Produce Depot is sponsoring the event, and it's be an amazing thing. And next Wednesday, I'm starting my series again. This series will be called Discover the Inner Depth of Paradise. It's the 4-part series to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the whole sin with the snake and everything that corresponded around that. So that's going to be the following week on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock at the Kollel. So tonight I decided I'd like to talk about an interesting topic that's been discussed for many years, and that's reincarnation, Gilgulim. I think it's a very important subject to discuss, especially if most of Kabbalah speaks of it. Most of literature that's written on Kabbalah speaks of Gilgulim, of reincarnations. So we have to understand the importance of it, that people spend much time to write on such subjects. More than that, we have to really understand what reincarnation is in the first place. What does it mean that a soul redevelops itself in another person's body? What does all this mean? To me, everything has to be very literal and meaning and real. If something is too aloof, we're not really touching it. So we have to really make it very down to earth. So in order to really get a good grasp on reincarnation, I like to break up this class into 3 segments. And we'll soon see that there are 3 different philosophical concepts associated with reincarnation that we could speak of. So I just randomly gave the titles to each subject that I think fit best. So the first segment we'll be talking about called God's Plan. The second is going to be called Our Mission, and the third segment is going to be called Lineage. And we'll try to get to the best of our capability to really comprehend what reincarnation is and how it affects us, and of course to what this connection to Amunah is, the belief of God. So the number one thing you must understand is the purpose of creation. We all know that Judaism, the foundation of Judaism is that life has purpose. That's what meaning of Judaism is. Judaism ends and starts and finishes with this sentence, that life has purpose. Everything else is just commentary. But the main focal point of Judaism is that life must have purpose. And the reason why life must have purpose is we have one fundamental question. And the question is as follows. On the basis that there is a God, and God is one. Now, we always say God is one. We say Shema Yisrael, Hashem, Hashem Echad. We say Hashem is one. We say it many times, twice a day. We say it many times throughout our lifetime. But a lot of us don't really pay attention to what we're saying. What is the meaning of one? One means all. It means just God is one, is all. There's nothing else other than God. So, and in fact, that gives us room to say that God is infinite. And once we say God is infinite, then God is not ending. There's no end of God's existence. So, not to finite, we start and we end. We have a beginning of our birth and we have an end of our lifespan. Our hands start here, we end here. We're a physical form. Anything finite has a beginning and end to it, whether it's in time, whether it's in actual space. When we say something is infinite, we say something much more than that. I would always give an analogy, is that if I would say, I would take a paintbrush and paint a black line that would go infinite. Go infinite. So simply, you would say, okay, it goes on forever. But in reality, that's not truly infinite, because a black line is only horizontal. And infinite means it has to go vertical. And not only vertical, it has to go diagonally. And it has to go not only diagonally in every space, it has to also go, that's only 2D, but it has to go 3D and 4D, it has to ever expand. Infinity means expanding forever. There's no ending. And when I say numbers are infinite, that's not a true statement. Numbers are not infinite, right? Because a 1 is only a 1. Once it becomes a 2, it's a 2 now, it's not a 1. There are infinite amount of numbers, but the number itself is not infinite, right? Once I make a 1, it's never going to be a 2. Once I change its form, it becomes a 2. It's not a 1 anymore. So there's an infinite amount of numbers, but numbers are not infinite, right? So we have to understand what infinite means. Infinite means not ending. So the question obviously is, how do we fit in a finite, our beings fit within an infinite realm, which is God? That's a big question. And we spoke about this, I spoke about it in other classes, and I really don't get into this, it's a class in itself, but the simple way is that we're all just fragments of God. We're all different fragments. God is everything, and we're definitely something. We're not nothing. We're definitely some molecule. No matter how philosophical you want to get, but we're definitely something. We're not nothing. So if God's everything, then we must be something of God. We must be a fragment of some sort of God. So getting back to what I want to speak about, and not really get lost into that subject, if God is everything, and God has everything within Him, so then God must have every attribute. And part of being in totality of perfection, that is also being a giver. Giving is something part of someone. A part of something. That's an attribute. If God would be missing giving, then that would be something missing within God. Therefore, God must be a giver. And if that is true, then God needs to give to something. And that's where the world takes place. The world is what God needed to create in order to experience, to be the God of a giver. To be a giver. To be native, as they say. To be a giver. And that's what the world is. So now, the question is, okay, God created a world. And God needs to give. So what is He going to give? Obviously, if God is totality, God is absolute perfection, God is 100%. So then therefore He's going to give 100%. He's not going to give half good, because that's already a lack. He's going to give something that's not lacking, which is 100% good. So what is 100% good? What could be 100% good that God can give? What is the greatest good? What's the greatest pleasure that one could experience in a life? Any examples? Having a soul. Okay, that's already, again, it has to be a little more real. I mean, I don't know what a soul is yet. We didn't even get there yet. The greatest thing in the world is God. So what God must do, must give Himself. There's nothing greater than God, logically. There's no logic.
How about consciousness of God?
What?
Consciousness of God.
I don't know what conscious means. God. God is a real thing. It's not superficial and heavy. God is real.
You asked the question to give the answer. I gave my answer anyway.
I'm just saying, but you're really saying what I'm saying. God is giving God. It's God Himself. Let me say, I don't want to really get into this, but I'll say it anyway. How does something finite live within infinite? So the best analogy is like a prism of light. White light is the closest thing we have in creation that's infinite. White light is not ending. So if you want to cause that to be fragmented, what do? If you take white light, you want to split it into parts. What do? You put it into what? Through a prism, regular prism. A prism is what God created. He created a prism. So the creation is the prism. We are multiple colors. All of us are a different part of God's light. And that's really just a very subtle, 2-minute, just to get a better grasp on it. We're all different attributes of God. We're all different fragments of God. So again, by you experiencing yourself in reality, by you living your life, you're in fact living God. To realize that. By you, every pleasure you experience through life, that is a pleasure of God, that you're experiencing God.
If you make that choice.
Even if you sin, you're experiencing God. The difference between pleasure of a sin and pleasure of a commandment is one, you know what the difference is? And this is why I'll answer that question. Why is God the greatest thing that you give? Because God is infinite, and therefore it's not ending. You see, the pleasure you would experience from a sin, the pleasure in itself is experience of God. It's pleasure. It's part of God. The difference is it ends. And best analogy is, let's say I give my child, I have a daughter, I have 3 daughters, I buy them a kitchen set. And then the next day I take it away from them. What's the reaction going to be? Crying, right? You know, be hysterical. Everyone's going to be crying, sad, what's going on? So why? I can tell them, why are you crying? 2 days ago you didn't have the kitchen set. What happened now? So the answer is because we're humans, and once we experience a level of pleasure, we need it now. It's built within us. So God knows that. God created us. So therefore, pleasure must last a lifetime. If that pleasure will be taken away from us, we're going to feel neglect. Not at zero anymore, we're going to be in the negative. And therefore, a sin is pleasure, but the problem is, as soon as that sin is over, we feel neglect. We feel back in the dark side. Therefore, God says, work towards a mitzvah, because that mitzvah will last a lifetime, and therefore that pleasure will always last within us. Which again is a separate subject. But what I'm trying to bring out is the greatest good that God could give is what is God himself. And how do you get God? That's the next question. How does one obtain God? See, in the physical realm, if I want to be close to someone, I can just walk towards you. I'm close with you. I'm next to you. How does something finite come close to something infinite? And the answer is there's two ways how to become close to someone. Either you can become physically close to someone, you walk towards them, or you can become best friends. And I have best friends living in the States, we're a few hundred miles away, and I'm still very close to them. Because we resemble each other. We share a lot of common history together, we share a lot of similar things, we love each other. That love, that relationship, is that something tangible, yet we feel close to one another. This is how we get closer to God. We resemble God. By resembling God, we experience God. God has 13 attributes, different attributes. By living those attributes, being kind, being loving, being charitable, being straightforward, fighting for truth. These things are experiences of God. Slow to anger, all these different ways. These are different ways that you can resemble with God. Mitzvahs, the commandments, are different ways how to resemble with God, and therefore you become one with God. Right? Very good. So this is
the thing about the infinite and the finite being together. I mean, the whole point of Tzimtzum. I mean,
that's what I was saying.
We can't be connected to the infinite. The whole purpose of this earth, this Olam Ha'asiyah, which is the lowest level, which is the concealment of Hashem. That's the only way we can survive. If we were to be in Hashem's presence, we would be completely nothing. We would be completely nullified. We would not exist.
So
the only way we can exist
you're saying
that we are separate.
On one hand, you're saying something very true. Tzimtzum is a very controversial subject.
Yes.
You know why? Because it could be a level of heresy. You know why? Because by saying God does not exist in something, it's saying God is limited.
The Tzimtzum is not saying that God is
separating
himself.
No, but that again, it means God's limiting himself.
He's concealing himself.
But that means, again, so that's the answer. How does God, who's one, conceal himself? If someone is smart and he wants to conceal his intelligence, what does he do? He acts stupid. If someone is strong, he wants to conceal his strength, what does he do? He acts the opposite, weak. If someone is one, he wants to hide his oneness, what do? Division. How does God divide himself? In Kabbalah, the best analogy they give to Tzimtzum, as we spoke, is the prism. Prism is the exact carbon copy of white light, just in fragments. And we're multiple colors of that. But again, I love to talk to you about this, but this is going to be, that's in itself is a long subject, it's a deep subject. But what I'm trying to bring out to at this point...
It's more than concealment, it's contraction. Right?
It's all different, they're all different.
Elements.
There's different,
they're different
versions.
They're different. There's never a good translation for that, but again, what I want to get to is very important is this. So therefore God creates a world. He wants to obtain total perfection. The world starts with what? Adam and Eve. Story of Adam. Adam versus the tree. He has one test. Does he pass the test? No. He fails. Right? History begins. Imagine if you would pass the test, what would have happened? The world would have been perfect. I don't know if you would exist or not. The world would have been perfect. God's plan would have worked. What happened? God failed. Adam failed. God didn't fail. Adam failed. Now, it's fascinating. It was one person versus one test. He had a chance to perfect the entire world. He failed. And yet we live in our lives every day, and we go through tens of tests throughout a day. We go through hundreds in a week, thousands in a year, millions in a lifetime, and hopefully we pass most of them, and yet the world is not perfect. And if anything, it's far from being perfect. So what is the difference between me and Adam? Adam had one test, and he could have perfected the world. I had a million tests, and I hope I passed most of them. But yet, I don't see anything happening with that. Like, what's going on over here? So, the answer is that, you see, biologically and scientifically, we all come from Adam, right? Adam is the first being. If that's and we're all children from Adam. So biologically, he had all the genes of us. That means, logically, he had the genes of tall and short, curly hair and straight hair and blonde hair and brown hair and red hair and thick hair and thin hair and freckles and non-freckles and blue eyes and brown eyes. He had genes of everything. There's nothing you could create beyond that. It means he in himself intrinsically had all of humanity's genes. He was called the all-inclusive human being. And if that's the case, Kabbalistically as well, he was called the all-inclusive human being spiritually. He was one man symbolizing all of humanity, all of the world, all of history on one moment versus one huge test in one moment. God gave it to him on a plate right there before him. You pass it, the game is over. You don't, we got to continue with something else. And he failed. So what do you do when you fail? God needs to obtain perfection. The world needs to be perfect. There's no less than perfection. 1% less is not perfect. So how do you change the test and still obtain the same perfection? So the best answer you can give is like if a person fails by the end of the year, it's too hard for him to take the test. How does he obtain all the information, yet avoid from taking one big test at the end of the year? Semesters. We have semesters. We break up the year into segments. And that's what God does. God divides the test and gives 50-50 to Cain and Abel. Then they fail, it goes to Shem, Ham, and the world continues dividing. And this is where we are. We are all fragments of Adam. Kabbalistically, we're all Gilgulim, we're all reincarnations of Adam. Meaning, we're not talking about the soul yet. Forget about the soul for a moment. Let's talk practical. We're all continuing Adam's job. All of us are a fragment of Adam's job to perfect the world. If we all perfect our job, that in totality, in unison with everything at one, that's when the world becomes perfect. We're all just fragments. And that's our job. Adam had one big test. He was all one human being. God did was he split him up. And then we are all reincarnations. And I'd like to explain a little bit more what this means. First of all, the word Gilgul in Hebrew means legalgel. What does legalgel mean? To roll. It means to roll. The test is keep on rolling. It's going to the next generation, to the next generation. God continues dividing, rolling it, till eventually you perfect the test. To get this a little bit better, I want to take it a step further. The Ramchal discusses there are two stages in life. There's a stage called Reisha, and there's a stage called Seifa, beginning and end. Which really means the stage before Adam sinned and the stage after Adam sinned. Two separate stages. What's the difference? Now like this. There's a big confusion in Kabbalah. What is the center of the world? On one hand, the Zohar tells us that the center of the world is the Gan Eden, is paradise, is the Garden of Eden. That was the center of the physical world. That is the center of the world. On the other hand, the Arizal teaches us in many places that in fact the land of Israel is the center of the world. And says the Arizal, but Gan Eden is not in the land of Israel. How do we know? Because if you look closer to the four rivers that protrude from the Garden of Eden, they're next to Babylonia, next to Babylon. They're not next to within Israel. So how could one Israel be the center of the world? At the same time, the Gan Eden, paradise, should be in the center of the world. So, the Arizal does something very fascinating. The Arizal says that there are two ways of saying something is the center. You can say something's in the center because you're physically, geographically in the center of the room. Right? The best place to put in a light bulb so the light should spread is the center of the room. But sometimes, when I say the word center, I'm referring to something else. I'm asking to be the center of attention. And if I want to be the center of attention, not always the center of the room is the best place. Up on stage is the best place. That's the best. It's not physically the center of the room. It's in the front. But yet it is the center of attention. You see, when Adam had that test, his job was just to turn the light on. The world was dark, perfect the world, bring God's light. Just turn the light on. He failed. You know what he does? The problem was, not only he didn't turn the light on, but he broke the light bulb. He destroyed the light bulb. Thank you very much. He destroyed the light bulb. And he destroyed the light bulb. So we have now a two-pronged job. We must first fix the light bulb, and once we fix the light bulb, naturally we turn on the light. So, what do we must do first? We must first fix us. Humanity is at stake. He imperfected himself. He must first fix himself before he can fix the physical world in itself. So God creates a stage called Seifa, end. End means as follows, second stage, okay? The world's not perfect. So now we must first perfect ourselves. Repent, do mitzvos. Once we perfect ourselves, then we can come to this stage and now turn that light on. For this reason, God created two centers. The Garden of Eden is the center of the physical world. Because its job is to spread light. The best place to spread light in the world is the center of the room. But now, once that failed, and we're not ready for that stage yet, so we're sent to the land of Israel. In Israel, we're given the opportunity not to be physically the center of the room, but to be the center of attention. And until today, we are in fact, Israel will always remain the center of attention. Through all history. Will always be the center of attention. Because that's the best place to do kiruv. Because all eyes are on Israel. Because everyone's watching Israel. And if you want to be the center of attention and promote Torah, and you want to help people to grow, then you've got to be the center of attention. And this is where Abraham comes in. Abraham says what? Hashem tells Abraham, Lecho me'atzacho beis avicha, leave your father's house and go where? To Eretz Yisrael. We all know that Adam was born circumcised. When he failed and he sinned, he grew a foreskin. He became an ara. He grew foreskin. Right? There's a very common denominator between the foreskin, the bris milah, versus the mouth. Right? First of all, the word milah means word. Words come from the mouth. Number two, the mouth and the bris milah are the two places where you could create. Right? Words create your vision in your mind, bring it out to the world. And bris milah, you have children. And more than the highest level of pleasure. Eating and intimacy. They're very intertwined. And when Adam ate from the tree, he grew foreskin. He imperfected his body. Caused a deficiency. So when Abraham was given the task to perfect that, he was sent to where? To the land of Israel, the center of attention. To do some kiruv. Perfect humanity. What was the first thing he needed to do? Bris milah. In fact, the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, written by Abraham himself, one of the oldest Kabbalistic books, writes that in fact God created a shtei brisas, two bris milahs, two covenants. One, the bris bein and the son, the oral contract, that he will be with him to the end of days, and make sure his children will succeed. And then the physical contract, the bris milah. Two, to somehow rectify the problem that Adam started. Where did Abraham settle? In Hebron. The Zohar tells us the word Hebron means chibur. Chibur is what? Connection. Connection to what? With Gan Eden. In Hebron, there's a Pesach that's open to Gan Eden. Abraham's job is to reconnect back to Gan Eden by perfecting humanity. In other words, Abraham is a reincarnation of Adam. He's the Megalgel. God gave him the test now. Now you must overcome the test. He's the Gilgal of Adam Arisha. In this way, maybe in fact, I noticed this week in this parsha that we have two prohibitions about Egypt. Number one, personally not seeing them. And second of all, not residing in the land. And I was thinking to myself, why do we need both? And whether they apply or not is a different subject today. But the Torah tells you not allowed to live in the land, and you're also not allowed to be amongst them. Why need two prohibitions? I think this is the answer. Because number one, Egypt symbolized impurity. The opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to first perfect humanity. So don't come together with other Egyptians. And secondly, don't reside in the land because it's the second stage. The second is once you perfect humanity, now we got to perfect the world at large. The physical landmass. So don't reside in a land that's called Egypt. Two symbols that are the opposites of what we're trying to do. Anyways, Abraham was the Gilgal of Adam. And I want to just take it a step further, just give you another example. Very interesting examples you find in the Torah are as follows. If you take a close look to Parshas Bala, You remember the story of Balak? Balak was a fascinating story. At the end of the 40 years of standing in the desert, we waged war against Ammon and Moab, and we destroyed them. Balak was the king of Ammon, who was afraid. He called the secular prophet by the name of Bilam to curse the Jewish nation. But what happened at the end? He ended up blessing them, and he got them in a different way. He sent the daughters of Moab to have immoral relations with them, and that's how he got them, caused the plague of 24,000 Jews died. So in Pinchas, with the zealous act, caused the Jewish nation to repent, and then. If you pay close attention to Parshas Balak, and I recommend you look at this inside when you have a chance, everything is associated with speech. Cursing. What was the act of Bilam wanted to do? To curse the Jewish people. When God came to Bilam and warned them not to do it, what did he tell him? He said, do not speak more than the words I speak with you. What happened? His donkey, in that story, spoke to Bilam. It's all about speech. Right? In fact, Balak's name is Balak ben Tzipor. Tzipor means a bird. Rashi tells us when a person that says gossip gets leprosy. And what does he bring as a rectification? 2 birds. Why, says Rashi? Because the Mitzatzek, they like to talk a lot. Twitter. In fact, the Zohar says that this tzipor, that's exactly right. This tzipor was a real tzipor, the Zohar says. It's fascinating. He said it was a crow that he would send out. I'm not sure if it was a crow or a parrot. It's fascinating where history comes from. But and he would send out to spy on the enemy lands. And he would come back and report to him what was happening. To Balak. That's what the Zohar says. Fascinating. It's all about speech. And then how they win at the end? How they win? Through immoral acts. They cohabit with the harlots of Moab. Right? Fascinating. 2 ways. Speech, the pad and mouth, and the bris milah. It's fascinating. You see, Bilam was a reincarnation of Balak, the Zohar says, of the serpent. Their job was to destroy Judaism. That's exactly what the serpent's job was to Adam. So they were megalgel, they rolled to retest the Jewish people, as a serpent did to Adam. And our job is to pass that test. And it's fascinating that Pinchas, who did with his zealous, what a covenant, bris shalom. You think, what's the connection? But you got to bris the covenant. He kept the covenant that was going between Abraham and God, and he rectified that with the Jewish people, and he himself got a covenant. And the Talmud tells that, in fact, Pinchas is Eliyahu. And where is he? He's by every bris. He's there. What's also interesting is by Bilam verse, with the Jewish nation, is in fact that Bilam, not only his koach, his strength of speech failed, but when he went towards the bris milah, I was thinking to myself, how do you win though? And you got to leverage. You had a strong uphold on the Jewish nation with the bris milah. You see, we were totally protected with the mouth. They couldn't curse us. But what happened to the bris milah? It's fascinating that generation didn't have, those Jews in that desert didn't have bris milahs at the time. It was the new generation. And because the conditions of weather that was done in the desert, they were exempt from having a bris milah. But even though they were exempt, but they were vulnerable. It didn't have that full protection in the bris. And therefore they failed in that segment. In that covenant they had with God, they failed it. That was the exact reincarnation that Adam had. That was the Jewish people. Versus Balak and Bilam with the reincarnation of the serpent. To take it one step further, I noticed this last week, 2 weeks ago. I was really working on this. It's fascinating. We're talking about the exit of Egypt. And there's something fascinating. By the Paschal Lamb, you find a dual personality. The Paschal Lamb, you find that you have to eat it with maror, bitter herbs, and matzah, and unleavened bread. Unleavened bread represents freedom. The bitter herbs represent the exile in itself. And I think, why would you need dual personality? Why do you need dual personality? It doesn't make sense. So, if you ever take a look at the tree of knowledge, something fascinating. Does anyone know where the tree of knowledge was? Anyone know?
Physically, what exactly?
Yeah, where was
it? Was?
No, I don't care.
Where it was located?
Yeah. No one knows where the tree of knowledge was. There you go. So let's see what the pasuk says. Pasuk says something fascinating. Pasuk says, oh, Hashem planted all the trees. The Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, V'soich HaGan was in the midst of the garden. The Eitz HaDas, and the tree of knowledge, Toivara, good and evil, period. Imagine, God's telling you, do not eat from this tree, because otherwise you'll die. And guess what? I'm not telling you where the tree is. The tree of life, that's in the garden. That's V'soich HaGan. V'Eitz HaDas, Toivara. I'm listening. Okay, continue. But there's no continuation. Where was the tree of knowledge? So the answer is, in fact, the Kabbalists tell us that really the tree of knowledge and the tree of life was the same tree. It is really, in fact, the same tree. So how is it possible to eat from one tree and refrain from eating the same tree? How is it possible? How could God command eat from the tree of life at the same time refrain from eating from the tree of life? So we're talking about fruits, right? Then what was the tree? So the Zohar tells us that the tree was a grapevine. It was grapes. Something fascinating about grapes. You ever look at a grape of wine, it always says that it was grown in the valleys of the Golan and the upper Galilee, and has the mist of almonds and the radiance of raspberries. And in the bottom it says 100% grapes. How's that possible? What's fascinating about grapes is it's the only type of vegetation we have that not only sucks in time, every harvest is a different taste, but if you plant trees within a mile radius, or 2 mile, 3 mile radius, it will suck the soil from those trees. And in fact, those grapes will taste like those trees. The Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge, was a tree of everything. And this is why you make Kiddush on every big occasion.